When I loaded up the new game Nuts, I'll admit that I was skeptical. I mean, how much fun can a squirrel tracking simulator actually be? But all it took was a few minutes for me to realize that I was wrong. There's a moment early on where it becomes clear that this is not going to be one of those games where you just sit around watching squirrels. But rather, it's something bigger and a lot more complicated than I ever would have imagined. And that's just the start of this surprisingly thoughtful new adventure game. Here's my review. It's 1997, and you've taken a job as a researcher for the Viago Institute, a group tasked with conducting an environmental impact study in a nearby forest before a megacorporation can bulldoze everything down and create a massive amusement park called Panorama Land. Your job is to spend several months observing and documenting the food sources and nesting locations of the forest squirrel population, and then send the information back to Nina, who we're told conducted a very similar study 15 years ago. Although time-consuming, your job is surprisingly simple and straightforward. What you need to do is monitor the forest using a 3-camera setup. During the day, you'll want to move the cameras to different parts of the forest, positioning them in hopes of recording the squirrels and figuring out their patterns. Then, by night, you'll scrub through the footage looking for movement and information. Once you've found the squirrel, you'll need to reposition the cameras in order to track the path and find out where both they're going and where they're coming from. Once you've figured all that out, you'll need to print out a picture and fax it to Nina. Easy, right? Well, not so fast. Right from the first assignment, there are signs that things are not going to be as simple as they might initially seem. For one thing, the squirrels are often easy to track, especially when you're dealing with 2 or 3 of them at once. There are also signs that things are not going well for Nina, who can't wait to shake things up with each new assignment. And then there's that troubling thing that you saw in the squirrel's nest. Something that'll have huge ramifications for the rest of the entire game. Now, given the narrative focus, the first-person perspective, and the fact that you can explore a forest, I don't blame you if you assumed that Nuts was one of those so-called walking simulators. While the story is certainly front and center, a lot of the game is focused on your job, which includes a whole lot of moving cameras and watching the footage that you recorded. It's easy to look at each stage as an elaborate puzzle that you'll have to solve, all of which will get you one step closer to experiencing the dramatic and thoroughly satisfying conclusion. For a game about tracking squirrels, Nuts gets surprisingly intense. Just right off the bat, there are a few things that this game gets right. For one thing, I like how each stage is set in a different part of the forest. This not only allows for a nice variety of stages, but it also means that the individual chunks of the forest are big without being too overwhelming. It's also easy to navigate the terrain thanks to the portable GPS unit, which does a good job at showing you where the cameras are located and the path that you took to get to them. And most importantly, tracking the squirrels is surprisingly fun. It's a task that sounds simple, but ends up being both challenging and rewarding. Best of all, I actually cared about the mystery and the journey the isolated researcher goes on. Nuts also has a striking visual style that really stands out. I love the way that it plays with colors and how the trees and rocks and squirrels and just everything else looks like it was drawn as line art. I would also add that the game does a great job of highlighting the objects that you can interact with. That way you're never fumbling around looking for the item that you need. There's just something meditative and relaxing about documenting the forest, and the music and ambiance perfectly fits the mood and the pacing. I like the presentation all around. Oddly enough, my biggest complaint about the game is its relatively short length. It took me about 3 hours to complete Nuts, which isn't bad, but this is one of those cases where I would have actually liked a little bit more filler. It can sometimes feel like the story is in a rush to show you all of its cards, whereas I wanted a few more levels about tracking squirrels. Don't get me wrong, the story is great, but I had the most fun doing the actual research work. With only 5 stages, I don't feel like I got enough squirrel-tracking to keep me satisfied. Wish that I could replay these stages with randomized locations and paths, because I really didn't get my fill from the story mode, and that's a shame. On the other hand, desperately wanting to play more of a game is not necessarily the worst problem to have. While I would have enjoyed a little more squirrel tracking, I can also appreciate that the story doesn't drag or overstay its welcome. The mystery is genuinely intriguing, and even when you figure out where the story's going, Nuts still has a few surprises waiting for you. Who knew that squirrel watching would be this much fun? With a strong story and fun mechanics, Nuts is one of the most surprising games of the year. Set up cameras and record the squirrels in their own habitat in this thoroughly enjoyable new adventure game. While being a researcher stuck in the middle of the forest may sound boring, the puzzles are addictive and the atmosphere is relaxing. Unfortunately, the story is too short and I would have preferred a few more levels. But what's here is a compelling mystery paired with a squirrel tracking simulator that's actually fun to play. Nuts is a small game that should not be overlooked. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What game character would you want to track and research? Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we have a bunch of reviews to get to this week, including some stuff I've been meaning to talk about for a while now. A little catch-up, if you will. I hope you won't mind. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,